Welcome back to the deep dive. If you've ever looked beyond the headlines, beyond the daily grind, and ask yourself, is there, a higher purpose? Is humanity actually heading somewhere specific? Then this deep dive is definitely for you. We are not touching on current events today. Instead, we're exploring the deep architecture of the universe.
Right.
And we're rooting this in foundational esoteric sources, these ancient wisdom traditions that argue for a single kind of hidden truth guiding all existence.
Exactly. And today, our sources are these really synthetic works of foundational occult philosophy. They draw heavily from things like the Hindu Vedas, the Kabbalah, Pythagorean mathematics, and Gnostic teachings.
The real mix.
A real synthesis. And these texts, they don't just offer philosophical ideas, They offer a pretty definitive, detailed map for what they see as the ultimate human goal. Preparation for something they call the Great Shift.
The Great Shift, okay.
And this isn't just self-help in the modern sense. It's more like an instruction manual for evolving into the next stage of consciousness. A stage often mystically referred to as the crystalline, or sometimes the Christ being.
That is a powerful term, the crystalline being. It really suggests clarity, doesn't it? Purity, maybe the perfect transmission of light.
Precisely. That's the imagery.
So our mission here, for you listening, is to try and extract the practical keys. The specific knowledge about the cycles, the forces, the nature of consciousness itself that we need to understand if we want to consciously participate in this evolution, this move toward a higher type of existence. We're looking for the roadmap for the spirit, or the monad, as these sources call it, as it supposedly begins its final ascent from matter back to spirit.
Exactly. We're trying to find that common thread, the one that runs through, well, arguably every true ancient tradition. The thread that asserts there's one universal wisdom doctrine, identical across all ages, even if it's dressed up in different cultural metaphors.
And the fact that this wisdom is still presented as necessary. It sort of implies that our modern ways of thinking might have, fundamentally missed something.
Let's put it mildly. The sources suggest they've failed us, in a way.
Okay, let's start right there then. The critique. Because our sources offer a really blistering assessment of the state of knowledge in our world. They argue that modern society, despite all its visible progress, has completely lost the spiritual thread.
Yeah.
And they criticize the two big pillars of modern thought, institutional theology and dogmatic science.
It's actually labeled quite flatly as a conflict of ages, and the critique against modern theology, well, it's particularly intense and specific.
How so?
It condemns the prevailing institutional religious bodies, not just for, having incorrect beliefs, but for entirely abandoning the inner, sincere spiritual path. The sources talk about unspiritual, dogmatic, too often debauched clergy.
Wow, debauched clergy. That's strong language.
Yeah.
What are they implying there? Is it about moral failure, or is it more kind of philosophical corruption?
It seems to be both, actually, but primarily it's a philosophical corruption that then leads to moral failings. By making the path to salvation depend on external dogma, sticking to the institution, rigid rituals, they essentially deny the direct inner relationship with the divine that, true esoteric knowledge is supposed to provide.
So they block the direct path.
Right. They became instruments of temporal power, warring sects focused on bigotry and hypocrisy, instead of lighting the way to the true, non-dogmatic spiritual light, the very path that this crystalline being we mentioned must walk. They deny the core ideas, like the duality of man, the potential for self-deification.
So theology built a kind of prison of dogma, okay? But what about science? I mean, the scientific method, at least it claims to be unbiased, right? Seeking truth through observation. Why does this ancient wisdom view modern science with such skepticism?
Well, because science from this perspective suffers from a profound blindness, materialism. The critique argues that modern science is busy building hypotheses on sand.
Sand, meaning no solid foundation.
Exactly, and suffering from constant, rancorous quarrels and jealousy. Because, fundamentally, it lacks agreement on the really core cosmological questions. It's kind of wrestling with theology for the position of infallibility, yet it rejects the very evidence that falls outside its current, quite limited physical view.
Can you give us a specific example of that, something that shows where science, according to these sources, closes its eyes?
Sure. The sources point specifically to things like deep psychological experiences or, the thaumaturgy of old miracle working. Even what they called modern mediumistic phenomena, things witnessed by serious scientists at the time like Crookes or Wallace,
Right, respected figures.
highly respected. But the moment these phenomena suggest non-physical forces or the reality of something like the astral plane, science tends to immediately dismiss them. It's delusion, it's fraud. Simply because these forces can't be measured with, a retort or a crucible. This insistence on only the measurable, the physical, well, that is the drift into materialism. It ends up denying the existence of the very spiritual essence that's supposed to be driving this great shift.
Okay, that denial really makes the search for a unifying, deeper truth seem essential, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If both the established church and the academy have sort of lost the roadmap, where does this unifying truth, this foundational wisdom doctrine, actually reside?
Well, the sources suggest that the real truth exists in an old book, an original, maybe unwritten doctrine, so ancient, its physical form is sort of indefinable.
Older than scriptures we know.
Way older. This doctrine supposedly provided the basis for the most ancient Hebrew occult documents, particularly the Sefer Zeniyuda, which translates to the Book of Concealed Mystery.
And what does this old book or the Sefer Zeniyuda contain?
It's said to contain the primal explanation of the cosmic cycles, and it illustrates this with a really profound visual. The divine essence emanating from Adam, the archetypal man-like, a luminous arc.
Let's pause on that luminous arc for a second. That's an incredibly rich image for this whole process of evolution, isn't it? What does the motion of this arc tell us about where we are now and this impending shift?
Okay, so imagine the divine essence, the initial breath or impulse, proceeding outward, right? It forms a circle that reaches its highest point, its highest circumference of spiritual manifestation. That's the stage of pure spirit.
The peak.
The peak. But then the law of manifestation, the cycle, requires descent. So this ineffable glory bends back again, returning towards earth, completing the arc. This descent is the path into matter.
And what happens as the spiritual light gets closer to our, well, dense physical reality?
It's described as a descent into darkness or shadow. The light becomes more shadowy as it approaches our planet, until, upon touching the ground, which means fully manifesting in the densest, most physical matter, it's described as being as black as night.
So we, as physical beings right now, are sort of existing at the darkest, densest point of that arc.
That's the idea. We're at the bottom of the U-turn, if you like.
Which means the great shift is the moment when the arc, having bottomed out in matter, starts its upward swing. And we are currently caught in the powerful returning vortex, they called it.
Precisely. And that returning vortex is the absolutely crucial part. It's described as bringing a higher type of humanity in its vortex. So the evolution into the crystalline being isn't just a nice idea. It's mandated by this cosmic mechanism. The universe is literally drawing spiritual light back towards itself, and we have to align ourselves with that ascending force or get swept away, perhaps.
This hidden knowledge, then, this difficult-to-get knowledge about working with the arc, this is what figures like the Hermetic philosophers and the alchemists were really after, right? They were trying to accelerate their own ascent up that returning arc.
They absolutely were. Figures like Roger Bacon, Paracelsus, even going back to Democritus and Gaber, they were often accused of charlatanry, weren't they? For seemingly trying to turn base metal into gold.
Yeah, that's the popular image.
But the sources argue they were deeply misunderstood. Their pursuit wasn't just primitive chemistry. They were actually seeking the hidden spirit in every inorganic matter.
Okay, so if they weren't primarily trying to make literal gold, what was their core objective? How did they approach this idea of like spiritualized physics?
Their goal was spiritual transmutation. It was about demonstrating that even the densest substance lead, for instance, has a latent spiritual side, waiting to be awakened, to be roused. The goal they sought was often symbolic.
Symbolic of what?
Of the perfected spiritualized substance, or the philosopher's stone, which often represented the perfected human being the crystalline state achieved. They worked with fire, distillation, chemical processes, but often as metaphors and physical aids for purifying the base elements of the self.
So they weren't just observing passively, they were actively interacting with these subtle forces that mainstream science denies.
Yes, exactly. As one source quotes from Bulwer's novel Zanoni, which drew on Rosicrucian ideas, we commenced research where modern conjecture closes its faithless wings. The alchemists, the true ones anyway, were working with the elements of their science that remain mysteries to the modern world precisely because they operated on the assumption that spirit and matter are two sides of the same coin.
And that spirit could be drawn out, activated within matter.
Correct. And that understanding is foundational if you want to prepare for the Great Shift, because it teaches us that our own dense physical form is also just a substance waiting to be spiritualized by conscious effort, by aligning with that returning arc.
Okay, so to successfully navigate this ascending arc, this great shift, we need to understand the basic structure of the universe and, critically, our place within it. The ancient wisdom tells us this structure isn't random, it's based on harmony, and this seems crucial, precise mathematics.
That's seen as the universal language of spirit, yes.
Mhm.
Pythagoras' system, for example, which apparently derived its metrical speech, its core ideas, directly from the Hindu Vedas. It insisted that the esoteric significance of the universe lay in number.
Numbers held the key.
Yes. Evolution, both physical and spiritual, is understood to be based on a mathematically precise, harmonious structure. It's not chaos. It's perfect law expressed through vibration, quantity, geometry.
And the centerpiece of this mathematical philosophy you mentioned is the tetractys, the sacred number 4. Why is 4 so important to this spiritual architecture?
Well, the tetractys represents completeness, manifestation, and law. Think of it as the perfect square, 2 by 2, 4, representing the 4 cardinal points, the 4 traditional elements, maybe the 4 planes of existence. The sources tell us that the number 4 is the ultimate emblem of moral justice and divine equity.
I get the square representing stability, structure, but how does it equate to moral justice? That connection isn't immediately obvious.
It's because the perfect square, the number 4, is seen as the structure wherein all powers and great symphonies of physical and spiritual nature lie inscribed. Think about it geometrically. You start with the monad, the single point 1. That point extends into a line 2, the line expands into a plane, a triangle 3, and the plane becomes a solid represented by the pyramid base, the square 4.
Ah, okay. 4 is the first stable, manifested, solid structure.
Right. It's the first complete, fully realized structure in 3 dimensions. And justice, equity. These are only possible when there's a fully manifested, structured system based on immutable law, not just potential. The tetractys, representing this manifested divinity, guarantees that the cosmic system, including things like karma, is absolutely fair and balanced. It's the foundation upon which the entire evolutionary journey, the whole arc, is built.
Okay, so if the macrocosm, the universe, is structured by this mathematical precision, how is man, the microcosm, organized to participate in this dual evolution? How are we built to ascend from the densest point of the tetractys, that bottom of the arc, back toward the monad, the point?
Right. This brings us to a really crucial, ancient philosophical view, one apparently shared across traditions: Brahmins, Buddhists, Pythagoreans, Gnostics, even early church fathers like Origen. It's the idea of the double nature of humanity.
Double nature, meaning?
We are not single entities. We are complex beings composed of, essentially, 2 distinct souls interacting within a physical frame.
Okay, we definitely need to define these 2 souls very clearly, because understanding their difference seems like core instruction for navigating the great shift, right? Let's start with the temporary one.
That would be the perishable astral soul. It's often referred to as the inner fluidic body. It's composed of sublimated matter. So it's highly refined, much finer than our physical flesh, but importantly, it is matter nonetheless.
And what's its function?
This astral soul is the vehicle for our lower desires, our transient emotions, our immediate instinctual reactions. It's the personality, the ego, in many ways.
And this astral soul, this is the part that experiences metempsychosis, right? The long series of transmigrations or reincarnations.
Yes, exactly. It's the astral soul that becomes more purified, hopefully, with every transmigration. It cycles through experiences, slowly refining its substance. But, and this is crucial because it is still fundamentally sublimated matter, it eventually perishes.
Perishes when?
At the threshold of every new, higher sphere of existence. It's temporary, it's finite, and ultimately it's subject to decay and absorption by the higher principles once its purpose in that cycle is served. It's the part of us that must be transcended for the real shift, the crystalline evolution, to occur.
Okay, so if the astral soul is temporary, what's the eternal aspect, the part we are meant to ultimately become or realize?
That is the agoides. It's a Greek term, meaning something like self-radiant or luminous body or luminous man. This is the incorruptible, immortal portion of the divine spirit within us. It's described as a direct, unblemished ray of the absolute.
So not made of matter at all, not even subtle matter.
Correct. It's pure consciousness, pure spiritual light. It's the spark of the divine itself.
And what's the ultimate destiny of this Algoides, according to these ancient sources? Where is it heading?
Its ultimate destiny is reabsorption into the divine. Philosophers like Aristotle, actually, and the Stoics apparently agreed with the Hindu sages on this point. The human soul, being an emanation of God, is finally reabsorbed into divinity, like a drop of pure water returning to the ocean.
So the whole point of the Great Shift, this crystalline evolution, is the conscious realization of this Algoides, allowing it to dominate and guide the lower vehicles, the physical body and the astral soul, towards that ultimate reabsorption.
That's the goal. We have to align the physical and astral bodies so they become perfect, transparent vessels for the Algoides to shine through.
This idea of two souls, it sounds a bit academic maybe, but the mystics, like Paracelsus, they believed the interaction between the spiritual and material principles was tangible, right? Like a magnetic interface affecting our daily lives. How did they visualize that interaction?
They absolutely saw it as tangible. They understood life force and spiritual influence, essentially as magnetism, sidereal or astral influence is constantly flowing through us. And this brings us back to Paracelsus, yeah. He theorized that nourishment, health, even disease are drawn into the body imperceptibly through the magnetic force.
Wait, so health isn't just about what we eat or the germs we encounter, it's also about what we magnetically attract from the cosmos.
According to this view, precisely, if we're constantly absorbing energies from the cosmos, then our spiritual orientation, our inner state, the balance between the Algoides and the astral soul determines the quality of those magnetic inflows.
So if the astral soul focused on base desires is dominant,
It draws lower, potentially detrimental influences. If the Algoides, the pure spirit, begins to assert its influence, it draws the pure, vitalizing currents necessary for health, growth, and ultimately transformation.
Van Helmont, another figure mentioned, deepened this with his idea of the Magnale Magnum. What did this concept of universal sympathy reveal about the practical steps needed for this shift?
The Magnale Magnum is basically the idea of a universal sympathy connecting all things like an energetic network, a web of life. Van Helmont taught that within this network, man possesses a hidden magical power, a power of a heavenly nature, located in the inner man.
The inner man, meaning the Algoides.
Essentially, yes. It's the sleeping potential of the Algoides, and this potential is the very force required to accelerate the shift, to consciously evolve.
So how do we wake it up? What's the practical instruction tied to repressing the outer man?
The sources say this power is roused when the outer man of flesh and the darkness is repressed. This is presented as the key Kabbalistic art, bringing back our innate, magical, yet natural strength.
And repressing the outer man means?
It means actively subduing the focus on the physical senses, lessening the grip of the instinctual demands of the material body, and quieting the transient emotions of the astral soul. This isn't about hating the body or ascetic self-torture necessarily, but rather taking away its tyrannical dominance over our consciousness.
That makes sense. It allows the inner man, the Algoides, space to emerge.
Exactly.
And that ties really nicely into the next section, doesn't it? Because this personal effort to repress the outer man has to align with the larger cosmic rhythm of the universe. The microcosm has to tune into the macrocosm.
Absolutely essential. The internal personal shift must synchronize with the great shift happening externally, cosmically. If the astral soul remains in command, the individual is effectively swimming against the ascending current of the entire cosmic cycle. And that's not a recipe for success.
Right, let's zoom out now to the really big picture, the cosmic timeline. This transformation into the crystalline being, it's not portrayed as an instant thing, right? It's driven by these massive rhythmic cycles that apparently span eons. We need to understand this rhythm, which the sources call the Great Breath.
That's right. The Great Breath represents the ceaseless motion of the one life, the absolute, which is seen as eternal. Everything in the manifested universe is governed by these huge cycles of expansion and contraction.
Like breathing in and out.
Exactly like that. And outbreathing is manifestation creation producing the world as we know it, the descent into matter. The shift we're currently undergoing is part of the inhalation, the cosmic contraction. This causes the world not to be destroyed, but to become spiritualized, returning its principles to the spiritual plane.
So it's a transformation, not an ending.
A transformation. And our present universe is described as just one in an infinite series generated by this eternal breathing process.
So matter itself, is it eternal or does it get created and destroyed?
Occultism teaches that the root of matter, called pratana, is eternal, just like spirit. But its physical manifestation, prakriti, is temporal and constantly evolving through these cycles.
And the monad, that individual spark we talked about,
Yeah.
where does it fit into this breathing rhythm?
The monad, that single individual ray or breath of the absolute, is the core entity making this whole journey. It cycles through the manifested universe. It has to fall into matter during the descending arc, the outbreath.
Why? Why the descent?
So that, inexorably, matter itself may ascend with the monad to become pure spiritual substance during the ascending arc, the in-breath. The idea is that spirit must experience matter fully so that matter can ultimately be redeemed, spiritualized by spirit. It's a necessary pilgrimage.
The monad's journey is therefore one of pilgrimage through successive kingdoms and forms. This explains that famous Kabbalistic axiom you sometimes hear, the one that charts the path of life.
It does. That axiom summarizes the entire evolutionary path the monad must take to gain consciousness and knowledge at every level of existence. A stone becomes a plant a beast a man a spirit, and the spirit a god.
That's a vast journey.
Immense. And this transition involves multiple cycles or revolutions of the egos, which in Kabbalism are sometimes known as Gilgulim.
Let's define Gilgulim a bit more clearly in the context of the monad's journey. Is it just reincarnation as we usually think of it?
It's much, much more expansive than just human reincarnation. Gilgulim signifies the necessary revolution of the soul, or the ego, through all the various kingdoms of nature, mineral, plant, animal, human, and beyond, across these vast cosmic cycles. It's the ceaseless necessity for the monad to experience every facet of existence to gather the wisdom needed for its return.
So the monad evolves from the mineral realm, where consciousness is maybe just latent, completely dormant,
Right, barely a flicker.
to the human realm, where consciousness becomes self-aware, capable of choice,
The crucial stage of individualization.
ultimately leading to the spirit, and then the God stage, where it rejoins the absolute, having perfected its understanding and its material vehicles along the way.
That's the path outlined, a return to the source, but enriched by the journey through manifestation.
Okay, now let's place our current humanity on this huge cosmic timeline. The sources say the Earth itself lives through 7 great rounds, or cycles. Where are we now, and why is this precise moment, our time, so critical for the Great Shift?
According to this framework, we are currently in the 4th round. Humanity as a fully developed, self-conscious species really comes into its own in this 4th round. The first 3 rounds were more preparatory, focusing on consolidating the physical globes of the planetary chain and establishing the basic elements and kingdoms.
And the later rounds, 5, 6, 7.
The latter 3 rounds, the 5th, 6th, and 7th, are described as the period when Earth and humanity will gradually return to their first ethereal form. They become progressively more spiritualized, less dense.
Okay, so the Great Shift we're talking about now, the one happening in our time, it's the major transition point, the moment we consciously have to decide to align with the trajectory of those final 3 more spiritual rounds.
That's exactly it. We are said to have just crossed the absolute turning point, the meridian point of the perfect adjustment of spirit and matter.
The meridian point, like the halfway mark.
Precisely. If you imagine that luminous arc descending into matter, we reached its nadir, the point of maximum density, maximum materialism, somewhere in the middle of this 4th round. We are now, supposedly, cycling onward on the spiritual side, the ascending arc.
Which means?
It means every subsequent action, every collective and individual choice is now driving us away from physical material dominance and toward the intellectual spiritual future that defines the 5th, 6th, and 7th rounds.
Wow, that's profound. It implies that purely material pursuits, which might have been cosmically necessary or appropriate at the start of the 4th round during the descent, are now becoming obsolete, even obstructive, to the forward movement of the planet and humanity.
They effectively become anchors holding us back in the past cycle, because our current era within this 4th round is designated as the Manasa period.
Nasa, meaning mind.
Yes, the period dedicated specifically to the development of Manas mind, consciousness, intellect. Manas is described as the intelligent, rational, and individualizing soul principle. It acts as the vital bridge between the agoides, pure spirit, and the astral soul, sublimated matter and desire.
Manas, then, is the bridge, the very substance of the crystalline being we're meant to become.
It's the vehicle for it, yes.
But if Manus is only fully developed in the 5th round, why is our effort now, in the later part of the 4th round, so urgent? Why the emphasis on preparing now for the shift?
Because the 4th round is where we forge and consolidate the tools needed for the next stage. Our primary struggle right now is to ensure that the higher, rational Manas, which is seen as a reflection of the universal mind, or Mahat, gains dominance over the lower, instinctual self that's tied to the physical senses and the desires of the astral soul.
We're building the foundation.
We're building the necessary foundation now for the unimpeded, full flowering of Manas in the 5th round. If we fail to establish the dominance of mind over matter now, collectively and individually, we risk being left behind by the rapidly spiritualizing current of the Great Shift.
What happens, according to these sources, to individuals or groups who refuse or simply fail to align with this ascending spiritual arc? What's the consequence?
Well, essentially, they fall out of sync with the Gilgalum of Earth itself. Since the Earth, as a conscious entity in this view, is moving towards a more ethereal state, those entities whose monads are still heavily dominated by the densest material principles will find themselves unable to function or incarnate in the lighter, more spiritualized environment of the later rounds.
So they don't perish, but they get left behind.
The monad itself, the divine spark, never perishes. But it would be forced by cosmic law to undergo further purification and evolution elsewhere, perhaps, on a younger, denser planet better suited to its current state of development. It would have to wait for another cycle. Our sources really emphasize that preparation now is about conscious acceleration and, in a sense, choosing our future sphere of existence.
So the Great Shift is essentially like a mass graduation ceremony for consciousness, determined by the maturity of our individual and collective awareness, all driven by this inexorable cosmic clock.
That's a perfect way to put it. We're past the point where purely external circumstances or instinct can dictate our evolution. Now, internal conscious effort aligned with the cosmic plan is mandatory for progress on this particular evolutionary wave.
This brings us logically to the ultimate goal, the endpoint, really, of all these esoteric paths we're drawing from. This transition from a material focus to a spiritual one. It culminates in a specific state of being. What is the philosophical definition of this crystalline state? How do the sources describe it?
Well, whether you look at Pythagorean philosophy or delve into the true meaning of nirvana in Buddhism, the aim is presented as singular: to free the astral soul, that lower vehicle, from the fetters of matter and sense, and by doing so, make the inner being fit for an eternal contemplation of spiritual things.
Okay, let's talk about nirvana. We often hear it misinterpreted in the West, don't we, as just annihilation or nothingness. How does the esoteric view clarify what nirvana really means?
Right. It's definitely not seen as nihilistic annihilation. It's framed as the annihilation of causality. Specifically, the cause is rooted in material desire and ignorance.
The annihilation of cause.
Meaning, the purified spirit reaches a state of being that is exempt from the effects of the Four Noble Truths: suffering, its cause, its cessation, the path. Because all cause, all previous material desires, egoic attachments, blind instinctual actions, has been completely understood, transcended, and therefore annihilated.
So the self remains.
The agoades, the immortal self, remains. It exists in a state of pure, illuminated contemplation, having fully transcended the need for further physical manifestation or the suffering tied to the cycles of birth and death driven by ignorance. It's a state of conscious, spiritual perfection and liberation.
This philosophical goal,
Yeah.
it ties directly into the concept of the Christ archetype, doesn't it? The crystalline man. But maybe not in the way modern theology typically defines Christ.
Absolutely not in the conventional way. The sources we're looking at draw heavily on Gnostic teachings here. They view the Christos, which means the anointed, as a universal spiritual principle, a guide, and an archetype of perfected wisdom attainable by the individual.
And the Gnostics use specific symbols for this.
They often use the symbol of the Ophis, or Agathodamon, the good serpent, as the emblem of wisdom. This wisdom descends or awakens within to reveal the unknown Father, which represents pure spiritual intelligence, the ultimate source.
So they seem to be arguing that the true Christos is actually the pure spiritual intellect, the very essence of the fully awakened Manas, bridging to the Ogoades. Who, then, was the opposing figure in their teachings? What represented the obstacle?
They created a very sharp philosophical contrast with a figure called Ildabaoth. He's portrayed as the material demiurgus, the lesser creator god, often equated by the Gnostics with the jealous tribal god of the Old Testament Jews.
And what was Ildabaoth's role?
He was viewed as the ambitious, ignorant creator who worked primarily with dense matter and darkness. His creation, according to the Gnostics, was a failed, soulless man, sometimes depicted as a monstrous being, initially crawling on all fours, lacking true spirit.
Wow, so the Gnostic myth presents a really stark choice for the learner, for anyone preparing for the shift. You either embrace the pure spiritual light and wisdom embodied by the Christos principle, or you remain enslaved to the material dominance and perhaps ignorant creation attributed to Ildebaoth.
Precisely. The spiritual light, the source of the Agouades, is said to come from the highest realms, the primitive man, or Enoia, divine thought, while Ildebaoth represents the lower binding forces of the purely physical world and limited consciousness. The transformation into the crystalline being is therefore the conscious rejection of Ildebaoth's dominance and the full active embracing of the Christos principle within. It's about becoming a clear vessel for pure spiritual intelligence while still embodied.
Okay, this is a massive spiritual
Oh,
undertaking.
wow.
It must have some kind of corresponding change in our physical vehicle too, right? We established that the body is seen as matter waiting to be spiritualized.
Oh.
How does the shift manifest physically, according to these sources?
This is where the source material points quite directly to the pineal gland. It's often cited in these texts as the atrophied organ of spirituality.
The pineal gland, the third eye in some traditions.
Exactly. The idea is that when humanity was in its earlier, more ethereal stages, before the full descent into dense material reality, this gland was highly active. It served as the primary interface for spiritual communication, intuition, and higher consciousness.
And what caused it to atrophy? Why isn't it fully active now in most people?
The descent into the densest matter and the corresponding overdevelopment and reliance on the five physical senses. As these external senses took over, focusing our attention outward onto the material world, the internal sense, the ability to perceive spiritual realities directly diminished. The pineal gland, which is described as being far more connected with soul and spirit than the physiological senses, supposedly shrunk and became largely dormant in modern humans.
So if we are now cycling back onto the spiritual arc, as you said, what does the potential reactivation of the pineal gland enable? How does it relate to becoming this crystalline being?
Its return to full activity is seen as the physiological marker of the spiritual reascension. When the Agouades, guided by the awakened higher manas, begins to truly dominate the lower self, the pineal gland supposedly becomes a fully functioning spiritual antenna again.
An antenna for what?
For perceiving and transmitting pure, unadulterated spiritual light and knowledge directly. It allows the individual to become, in a sense, transparent to the divine will and universal consciousness, hence crystalline. It's considered the physical organ required for achieving that state of eternal contemplation and fully realizing the higher self while still in a body.
The ultimate goal, then, is framed as moving from being merely human toward becoming like a god, in a philosophical sense, a fully realized spiritual being. How is this actually achieved, practically? What's the method?
It starts by understanding that, according to these teachings, man is a composite being, a compound of the celestial hierarchies that structured the universe. We carry the essences of all these beings within us. Therefore, we have the potential to become superior to those hierarchies by achieving conscious, self-directed perfection.
And the mechanism for that?
It's described as rigorous and twofold. First, by paralyzing his lower personality, and second, by realizing the profound truth of the non-separateness of his higher self from the one absolute self.
Okay, let's break down paralyzing the lower personality. That sounds rather drastic. What does that look like in daily life? It doesn't mean literally becoming paralyzed, obviously.
No, not at all. It means starving the ego, the astral soul, of its habitual control. It means consciously detaching from the endless demands and reactions of that lower self, the hunger for external validation, the sting of transient emotions like anger or jealousy, the fear tied purely to the physical world's survival.
So constant vigilance.
Constant internal vigilance, yes. To ensure that your thoughts, feelings, and actions originate from the rational, compassionate higher manas, aligned with the Agouades, rather than from the instinctive, temporary, often selfish impulses of the lower personality. Only when the noise of the lower personality is sufficiently silenced can the higher self, the Agouades, fully manifest its inherent radiance and wisdom.
This brings us back, then, to the source of our spiritual potential itself, this idea mentioned in the outline about the voluntary sacrifice of the sons of wisdom. Can you explain that?
Right. This is one of the most, beautiful and complex teachings in this esoteric framework. The sons of wisdom, or fiery angels, sometimes called Dians Tohans, are described as highly evolved spiritual beings. They supposedly refused the cosmic mandate to create a purely animal man early in Earth's evolution,
Why they refuse?
because they recognized that such a creation, lacking the spark of higher mind, would be essentially soulless, trapped in blind materialism, unable to consciously choose its path back to spirit. So instead, they offered themselves as voluntary victims.
Victims, how so?
They chose to incarnate within the evolving physical framework of early humanity. They essentially projected sparks of their own consciousness into these developing forms.
And why did they make this sacrifice? What did it achieve for us, for humanity?
By doing so, they supposedly exchanged their impersonal, sidereal bliss, their natural state of perfect, detached spiritual contemplation, for the curse of terrestrial life, the limitations and struggles of embodiment in dense matter. But through this sacrifice, they endowed early humanity with the crucial missing element: conscious knowledge, manas, and spiritual aspirations. They gave us the spark of intellect, the ability to reason, to choose, to understand our connection to the divine, which allows us to consciously direct our own evolution and accelerate the great shift.
So they are the reason we have the inherent ability to realize our non-separateness from the absolute.
That's the teaching. Our path forward is therefore fundamentally paved by the potential for knowledge and universal love, which they ignited within us. And this potential must consciously overcome the inertia of blind materiality, the legacy of Ildebaoth, if you will.
This entire journey of conscious acceleration, this choosing of the higher path, it's all governed, of course, by the ultimate law of the universe mentioned in these texts, karma. But if we're seeking enlightenment, aiming to become crystalline, how do we reconcile the idea of an inescapable law like karma with our own freedom of will to choose that path? Doesn't karma predetermine things?
This is a point where Western understanding often falters, mistaking karma for fatalism or punishment. Esoteric philosophy insists karma must be understood differently, not as a punitive system run by some moral judge, but as absolute eternal harmony. It's impersonal, it's mathematical.
It's mathematical.
Yes, like physics. It's simply the inherent tendency of the universe to restore equilibrium whenever balance is disturbed by any action, thought, or feeling. The sources use a great analogy. It is not the wave that drowns a person, but the wretch who places himself under the impersonal laws of the ocean.
Okay, unpack that analogy. What exactly is the lesson there for the learner, for someone trying to prepare for the shift?
The ocean itself isn't jealous or angry, right? It simply obeys the laws of gravity, fluid dynamics, wind patterns. If you foolishly choose to sail into a hurricane or stand on the shore when a tsunami warning is issued, the consequence is inevitable, regardless of your intent or moral character. Karma is said to work the same way. It's the automatic mechanical force of adjustment.
So we create the causes.
Man plans and creates the causes through every thought, every emotion, every action. Karma simply adjusts the effects with perfect precision to maintain universal balance. It's not about reward or punishment. It's about consequences returning to their source.
How does consciously understanding this law aid our preparation for the great shift then, if it's automatic anyway?
Because the crucial role for the learner, for the aspirant, is to unveil karma's intricate paths through dedicated study, self-reflection, and meditation. By understanding how causes translate into effects by mapping the laws of the ocean as they apply to consciousness and action, we can learn to generate causes that are beneficial, harmonious, and aligned with the ascending arc,
leading to positive outcomes,
leading to personal and collective growth, and minimizing future disruptions that require painful readjustments. This understanding ensures we are always striving to work for the good of fellow men, aligning our personal will with the universal will moving towards spiritualization. It prevents us from getting lost and perishing, metaphorically speaking, in the labyrinth of life, created by ignorance of this fundamental law. The truly crystalline being, presumably, acts from a place of absolute intuitive knowledge of karmic law, creating only harmonious causes. Hashtag Hatch Outro. So yeah, to try and synthesize this really profound deep dive, the Great Shift isn't some far-off, maybe event. According to these sources, it's the inevitable, ongoing transition of the monad, your own divine spark, deep within back onto the ascending arc of spiritualization. We've apparently passed the deepest point of materiality.
We're on the way up.
We're on the way up. And our current purpose, our work, is to consciously cultivate the manas, that bridge of higher consciousness, with real rigor and intent. By doing that, we progressively free the incorruptible Agawades, the immortal spirit, from the limiting constraints of the lower astral desires and the purely material perspective. The shift, ultimately, is simply a return to pure, illuminated consciousness, what these texts call the crystalline state.
It's a truly phenomenal vision, isn't it? a cosmic destiny that's tied directly to our daily discipline, our moment-to-moment choices. And if the highest wisdom needed for this personal evolution has been, as these sources claim, guarded in secret traditions and mystical texts for millennia, only really available through the kind of deep esoteric research we've explored today, then you have to ask yourself, what forgotten practice might hold a key now?
Right. If the great secrets of spiritual attainment were once hidden in plain sight, maybe, but within the scorned or misunderstood daily practices of history. Think about the alchemist's careful symbolic tending of the chemical fire, day after day, aiming for inner transmutation. Or maybe the faker's rigorous, mindful subjugation of physical matter to demonstrate the undeniable power of spirit.
In what seemingly simple, perhaps even currently scorned or ignored activity in our modern, fast-paced, high-tech world, might actually be the forgotten key. The key to awakening your own atrophied spiritual organ, that pineal gland maybe, and consciously accelerating your own personal shift onto the ascending path.
Yeah.
The path of the crystalline being, that knowledge, that practice. Perhaps it's waiting for you to seek it out, to rediscover it.
The journey, as always, continues with you.
Deep Dive has completed its mission for today. We'll see you next time.